It's now abundantly clear that Queensland and New South Wales hold the key to this election, but both this week's polling, that's public polling, and private polling for the major parties suggest that if the contest is really tight, Victoria and South Australia could maybe just save Labor's bacon. According to Newspoll in today's Australian, the coalition is well in front in Queensland and Western Australia, marginally in front in New South Wales and well behind in Victoria and South Australia. At this midpoint in the campaign, I've asked the ABC's veteran election analyst, Antony, to join us now to take a closer look at what's going on. Antony, you've applied those polling figures to electorates state by state. So let's look at how the seat count would go. Firstly, Queensland.
Well, in Queensland, the Labor Party on the Newspoll figures would lose 8 seats. The swing is large enough to take 8 of the 10 Labor marginal seats under 5% to the coalition side of the pendulum. That's assuming that it's a uniform swing. And if you apply the figures for New South Wales as well, you also get 8 seats falling to the coalition in New South Wales, which is 16 of the 17 seats that the coalition needs to form government.
Now, before we move on to some of the other states, you do have to take into account, don't you, that in some individual seats you could get quite a different result. I think Eden-Monaro, one of the most traditionally a very marginal seat, held marginally by Labor, which won it at the last election. Now there are lots of indicators suggesting that Labor would actually hold that seat, whereas this swing would take it away from them.
That's right. And there was a poll last Monday in the Canberra Times indicating a 10% swing to Labor in Eden-Monaro. What we might be seeing in some of these seats like Eden-Monaro is what they call a sophomore surge. That the Liberal Party...
Nice American term.
An American term. They hung on to that seat for years. The coalition, all through the Howard years, hung on with Gary Nairn as a really good local member. Lots of direct mail, direct marketing to people of policies of the government. Well, they don't have that advantage anymore. Is there sort of going to be a sort of drift towards Labor? Now, Labor's got the sitting member, can do that sort of tactic, and it's much harder for the coalition to get that seat back. There might be a few of those seats around the country where that sort of thing bites.
So you're talking about the syndrome of the surge for the first termer. So what happens in Eden-Monaro could happen in some other seats.
Yes.
So what about Victoria?
Well, what the Newspoll revealed was that while there is this big swing in New South Wales and Queensland, that in Victoria there was a substantial increase in the Labor vote, and Labor could potentially pick up 3 seats in Victoria. And very similar story in South Australia. Again, a big surge in the Labor vote. Labor could pick up 2 seats. Again, that's applying a uniform swing. You've got always the caveats with those things. But the Newspoll showed the most remarkable difference in swings between states. We haven't seen anything like that for 2 decades, since the 87 and 90 election, when we saw quite disparate swings going on between different states.
Well, in fact, Victoria was extraordinary. 59% Labor, 41% Liberal.
Yeah, the Nielsen poll was published this morning also, which broke down by state. It roughly came to exactly the same figure. It had 74 for Labor instead of 76, applying the state swings.
So, sorry, when you say 74 versus... You mean the overall figure. In other words, that if you look at the cost in seats of these polls, with Newspoll, you put Labor with 76 seats
Yes.
out of 150.
Yes.
If you apply Nielsen, you put Labor with only 74 seats.
Which is 1 seat short of being able to have
so
a
76
government.
is one seat over, which would allow Labor to govern by the slenderest of majorities. Nielsen puts them just slightly under.
Yeah. And the difference is created by Nielsen hasn't detected quite the disparity in swing. The swing was slightly smaller in Queensland, and the swing wasn't nearly as pronounced to Labor in Victoria and South Australia. So it'll be a matter of which of those polls is right. Often the polls accumulate the state polls, usually over several months. They've done it over a shorter time frame this time, so the sample size is smaller. There's also the other question that what this is accumulating in the last 3 polls, and of course it's the 3rd poll, the most recent, which has been the worst for Labor. So is there a trend or is there not a trend? I think what we've seen in the first 2 weeks of the campaign is polls which have bounced around a bit. There is a bit of volatility out there.
Well, a lot of volatility if you consider that in one of those polls, on the basis of 1 week of campaigning, Labor lost 6% of its primary vote in one block. Now, that is an extraordinary shift in the context of an election campaign.
It is, and if there is volatility in the electorate, that volatility can go the other way, depending on how the next week's campaigning going. I think people are looking at it. There is still 2.5 weeks to go. There are still things that are going to happen. The government's struggling, has struggled through the first 2 weeks. It sounds to me like it's getting a bit more onto some sort of message today and yesterday. But we've still got time to go, and I think too many people are very eager to call the election. We are seeing...
Well, there are lots of things that could happen to either side over the next couple of weeks.
What's happening? The media has changed in recent years. It's harder and harder. There's a lot more immediate news out there. The one thing newspapers can do each day, which nobody else has, is an opinion poll. And we're seeing more newspapers leading with opinion polls, which then feed through the news for the day.
No, so just to complete our picture around the country, Western Australia.
Very little change. The 46% was the Nielsen figure, slightly better in the.
This is for Labor.
For Labor, yes, 46%, which basically is very little change in Western Australia.
Possibility of one seat being lost by Labor on those, possibility.
And one of those is a notional Labor seat. I was talking about the advantage of Labor having sitting members. One of the disadvantages they have of their 12 most marginal seats, there's only 4 with sitting Labor MPs. 5 of Labor's 12 marginal seats are actually only notional Labor. They have sitting Liberal MPs. 3 others have no sitting MP, and there's only 4 of Labor's 12 most marginal seats with a sitting Labor MP to defend them.
Now, the conventional wisdom of this campaign seems to be that Labor will hold its seats in Tasmania. And what about the Territory?
Well, the one seat up there is Solomon, based on Darwin.
Well, there's a safe Labor seat, but...
Lingiari will be safely held. Yeah. Solomon is always a marginal seat, and the voters of Darwin are usually very good at picking who's going to win the election, and they'll elect a member for that party.
When you look at the difference between Victoria and Queensland, you make the point. I can't think of a time when you've seen a discrepancy like that in the history of polling. But why?
Well, we did see something similar in 1990 where the Cain government was deeply unpopular in Victoria and Labor lost 10 seats. But the recently deposed National Party government in Queensland was equally unpopular there, and so Labor gained seats. I think what's really happening is you're seeing a real difference between the way issues bite in different states, and particularly in Sydney and in Brisbane. Clearly, boat people is a much bigger issue in Sydney and Brisbane than it seems to be in Melbourne.
And then you've got the extra factor in Queensland of a man named Rudd. And also possibly the unpopularity of the Queensland Premier.
And the unpopularity of the New South Wales state government. The inability of the state government to deliver infrastructure is clearly being picked up as a federal issue. Even though the federal government can't actually build the infrastructure, it's still seen as something they have to respond to in Sydney.
Antony, thanks for that. We'll be talking to you again through the course of the campaign, but thanks.
Thank you.